Hi, in this video I'm going to walk you through some of the specifics of responsive design. We're going to define breakpoints and kind of discuss the different things that need to scale or realign, maybe be removed, etc., depending on the different screen dimensions, breakpoints, and device that you might be looking at. First, let's go ahead and define what a breakpoint is. It's essentially the different widths of different devices you might be using. So with this is a widescreen monitor. It's 1440 pixels. This is a regular size laptop at about 1280. Hi, in this video I'm going to walk you through some of the specifics of responsive design. We're going to define breakpoints and kind of discuss the different things that need to scale or realign, maybe be removed, etc., depending on the different screen dimensions, breakpoints, and device that you might be looking at. First, let's go ahead and define what a breakpoint is. It's essentially the different widths of different devices you might be using. So with this is a widescreen monitor. It's 1440 pixels. This is a regular size laptop at about 1280. You can have landscape and portrait tablets, and the same for mobile. Generally speaking, you want to choose a few of these. You don't have to design for all of these. Developers work with a grid system, which then we also mimic, and then they do theirs based on percentages. So we don't have to design to every single device out there. There's hundreds, and that's not realistic. So we kind of design within these parameters. So maybe for a phone, you'd want to design something around 400 pixels wide, perhaps. This 768 is pretty good for a tablet. Maybe you choose 1024 or 1280 for desktop. And most likely 1440 would be too wide to really worry about. So let's go ahead and look at this Airbnb example, and I'm going to talk about that too wide right away. So here's a quote-unquote kind of normal-looking browser, and they've got it set up so that there's 4 columns. The images are nice and big. The text is very legible. There's good spacing in between everything. We've got these kind of fun random kind of filters that we could use. I'm clicking on design right now. If I wanted to look at cabins, I could do so. There is also the ability to search in probably a more normal way, which would be that you already know where you're going, and so you just type in perhaps New York, you type in your check-in dates, all of that kind of stuff is of course there, but Airbnb is having a good time with this because they do have so many unique properties that they've decided to embrace that and kind of run with that with the design, and that's kind of a fun idea. So what do I mean by eventually a designer or a developer sort of will stop with the grid? If I scale this out, you'll see that the pictures are going to get bigger. So this is a fluid grid. So they continue to scale up and scale up and scale up, but stay as a 4-column grid until they pop. And so that's considered a breakpoint. It's where the design broke and it couldn't stay in that 4-column and continue to look optimal. So now they've moved to a 5-column grid. Now the text and everything can have those same nice spaces. Occasionally you're going to have a really long name, so you have to do the ellipses. The designer has had to work through all of those kinds of things. And we've still got pretty normal margins here on the sides. But that's because it's still not too far out of the parameters of a quote-unquote normal browser. But I have this really wide screen, so I'm going to start dragging out. And you'll see that eventually they don't pop to a 6-column grid. They say this is it. So anything clickable, anything important, logos, profile, filters, and the different properties, those all stop at whatever this is. Let's say it's 1280 perhaps pixels wide, and everything after that is just negative space, and that's because they can only sort of accommodate so many different kinds of browsers, and eventually it's time consuming. It's not effective use of their time to design to all these different things, and most of us wouldn't be using a screen this wide anyway, or have our browser this wide even if we did have a screen like this. So let's go ahead and start pulling this back in. You'll see that the Airbnb logo is both the logo and the word mark, and there's lots of nice spacing, and the navigation up here for searching in a less kind of esoteric, quirky way is going to stay standard no matter how big. So we'll go back to that first breakpoint. It's going to pop to 4 right about there. They'll get smaller and smaller and smaller until they pop to 3. So now we're probably starting to get into a small laptop or a tablet, and you'll see the pictures get bigger again. So it's all about making sure you use the space in the best way, the most user-friendly way. This continues to stay the same. These icons never change regardless of the size. But you'll also see, if you look at the logo, you'll see that at the 3-column breakpoint, they decided that there's not enough space anymore to accommodate the full word. I think that honestly that was one breakpoint too soon, but that's up to the designers and developers at Airbnb. So we'll keep moving this over until it pops again. Now for sure right here, now there isn't enough space, and that makes a ton of sense to me. They probably were splitting the difference so that there's a little bit less coding and media queries necessary to accommodate that. We still have the same basic structure. The pictures are allowed to get really large because we have a 2-column grid now, and then we start to scale in and scale in. This starts to collapse on itself, so even the navigation is slightly, so there, I want to make sure we see that really well. So this is all collapsing on itself, and then right when I get to here, this would be a fairly small tablet or a large phone at this point. And so what we've got them changing it to is that the navigation changed so that it can, all of the things that were under here as a kind of multi-tab, they changed it. And so that sometimes responsive design is not just, oh, I gotta keep going there. Sometimes responsive design is not just scaling and rearranging, it's actually changing a little bit the design and the functionality. And so they're basically saying, all right, well, people are using a phone at this point or a small tablet. We need to make sure that they have the ability to search in the most effective and efficient way. Imagine a restaurant. So maybe with the desktop version, they have a big hero image of their dining room or one of their meals or lots of their meals. They can assume that you're on your computer and therefore you have the time and maybe the internet speed, etc., to go ahead and take that little extra moment and really enjoy that process. But if you're looking at that exact same website, same URL from your phone, well, chances are you're in your car or walking or on the train. And so they're probably going to remove that photo element from those smaller breakpoints and create probably a map, a clickable map, and a phone number so that you call and make a reservation or whatnot. So sometimes responsive design is scaling and changing like we're looking at here, and sometimes it's a legitimate change in the design. All right, so it scales one more time, and now we're at phone. And no matter what I do here, it's gonna stay a single column. The filters are all now right there. They moved over. These are still all there and slidable. It's a scroll, and all the information is here, but it's now basically an infinite scroll because of the sizing. Icons never changed size regardless. If we were to scroll all the way down, those, I don't know if I'll ever hit the bottom here, but those icons should be there. They would be the same size. They didn't change the cropping of the photos, which is actually an interesting choice. A lot of times with responsive design, you would have these kind of have little fluid frames around them, and the cropping of the different images and properties would change. They've chosen to do a very static crop and allow everything to occur through scale rather than redefining the shape that they live in. That's a quick rundown of responsive design. There's quite a bit more to it, of course. As you get into your own projects, each one is going to have some different challenges. This is kind of my bread and butter as a designer, and I actually love and embrace the challenge of figuring out how to create something that looks really great, optimal in this, very wide, almost sort of squarish, rectangular, all the way to a very vertical aligned rectangle, and continue to keep that same website looking good for my clients across all breakpoints. I'm going to walk you through the responsive design of a travel app, essentially, a social kind of travel app. And we're going to go with kind of mobile first, then tablet, and then desktop. I'm going to show you kind of what changes, what doesn't change across those different breakpoints, how you can align things to a grid, how every once in a while you need to break that grid. And I'm going to keep the grid on most of the time because it's actually pretty important for responsive design. So mobile first is kind of the industry standard, and it's because if you can design the most sort of user friendly or minimalistic, shall we say, breakpoint first, then in theory it should allow you to add things if need be. In this case, it is all the same information. But for instance, if you were doing a restaurant app, maybe the desktop version could have a big picture like this of one of their meals or the dining room or things like that. And for mobile, probably want to lead with phone number, an address, clickable map, things of that sort. So there are times when responsive design, in fact, totally changes your design. In this case, we're going to go ahead and keep the same thing. We're going to just be rearranging things, organizing, scaling, etc., to make sure that we optimally fill that space. So, let's see. I think I actually want to have two of these on at any given time. So there we go. Because we're going to do kind of a compare and contrast. So here we've got the login and the sign up, and they are nicely aligned to our grid. Everything else is center aligned through the middle of the screen. The button is also aligned to the grid. And things just by necessity must cover up these folks' face. They do have to function like a background, and we can't be too worried about where that lands, especially because once a developer gets a hold of it, depending on the device, this perhaps is maybe an iPhone, but maybe another device will be a little bit wider, and so this text is always going to fall somewhere different, and so you just can't worry about that kind of stuff. What you can do is to simply put some sort of filter so that it's at least dark enough that we can read over the top. I'll be honest with you, I think that this is a little bit pushing it for accessibility. I would probably have darkened this even a little bit more, the white over some of the sky areas if I turn off that grid. I mean, they're legible, but they're not probably perfect best practices for accessibility. So then we've kind of got, so how does that change here? I think we should just kind of go across to the 3 breakpoints. So now we get more space. So it stops being this really vertical cropping. Suddenly we see, oh, there's other people in this photo. We didn't even know that. And it can become a little bit more square in order to fill this space nicer. The button actually gets smaller, even though we have more screen real estate, in order to snap to the new grid and not have just kind of ridiculous amounts of space on either side, that this actually gets a little bit smaller. Everything else stays, the heading and subhead kind of stay similar. They're still center aligned. And the sign up and log in stay exactly the same. They just live over here. This right hand side snaps to the grid, and this one doesn't. It would be too small. It would be too small if we made it just fit one column, and it would be kind of horsey and too big if we made it the fit 2 columns. So this is a case where it's okay to break the grid for some consistency across different breakpoints. And then DreamShare stops being here. It kind of goes up here, and it's going to start to function probably, I assume, like a clickable logo to take you home. No matter where you are on this screen, it probably will take you back up to this top. And then finally, how does that change here? Let's try and get 2 of these on at the same time. There we go. So the login and sign up stay the same. They're continuing to break that grid, but snap at least to one side of it. They are a little bit further on the inside. DreamShare stays perfectly on that left-hand side. The image now, you'll see, greatly exceeds the area of the 12-column grid. And that's because there's not really anything super important about it. Remember when we were on the mobile, we couldn't see that there were all these people. It didn't really bother us. They're not super important. So if for some reason someone's browser was only this wide, we would just miss one person, and this person's head and this person's head would get cut, and that's just completely fine. The grid needs to be employed for all clickable information and things that must be read. So that's why the logo and the sign up and all the text and everything that could potentially be clicked and needs to be read stays within that grid. And other things such as a hero image, like that big picture at the top, is okay to extend past. All right, so now we've got how DreamShare works. And you'll notice that the text is never getting bigger. It did get bigger here for the heading. It had to get bigger because it needed to fill that space better. But you'll see that how DreamShare works across all three of these is the same. It doesn't look too big here, and it doesn't look too small here. You could maybe make this a little bit bigger, but it's not absolutely necessary. It's up to you. And I think that's something that gives a lot of students, and any designer actually, a little bit of trouble when working with responsive design, is that it's a little bit subjective. You need to work within the confines of the brief. You need to talk to your developer about, do they want a 12 column? Do they want a 10 column? What's the framework they're working in? But after that, it's kind of up to you how you want to lay things out and fill that space, and how you feel that it looks the most optimal. So we're going to see here that across desktop and some kind of tablet, that they've chosen to go with a 3-column grid for this next part. You'll see that let me try and get a little bit closer. You'll see that the cropping changes because this 3-column grid is wider than this one. And we're trying to keep things fairly similar top to bottom so we don't end up with too much scrolling. So this becomes kind of square-ish. This is definitely a vertical. And the button, that doesn't change. The text sizing doesn't change. We just get to see a little more of the images on this one. And then when we get over here, they were all stacked. So in mobile, quite often you're going to employ a single column design, and that's because we've all become very comfortable and accustomed to scrolling on our phones, and we know what to do, we know what to expect, and we don't worry about it if it's super long. Like, that's a long scroll, but it's completely acceptable. So that's what they've done there. The croppings, again, change a little bit, and that's important too when you're selecting photography when working on a responsive website. You need to think about that. So if this photo truly had only been this much information, if it had just been these two people and it was a vertical cropping, it would not work for our other breakpoints. So it's really important to, most of the time, choose a landscape or a horizontal layout for your imagery. It will allow you the most options. You could crop this very vertically, like we saw on the mobile. You could let it be super wide. You could crop it square. It just gives you more options. So all of these photos are more landscape, horizontal, and that allows them to be used in all these different ways. All right, so then we get these, I guess they're employees of this app that are going to maybe help you plan your holiday. And so I'll zoom in a little bit. We've got pretty cool little design. I like the little circle avatar cropping. I like the way it's cut out there with the little music thing. I think it's saying it's a little icon saying kind of what they like. So this person likes music, and this person likes black and white classics. That's a bit of a stretch. I feel like maybe a little film strip would have been better for that. That feels like she's more of a photographer. This person likes art, so there's a little paintbrush. And this person is a Star Wars fanatic. So again, I think they could have maybe done a little bit more fun design with like a TIE fighter or something. But anyway, you'll see that the circle for all of these snaps to the grid. Everything is nicely center aligned. Text rarely, if ever, needs to snap to a grid. It should, if it's left aligned, it should probably left aligned to one of these. But when it's center, it's kind of a free-for-all, and that's completely acceptable and fine. You cannot make everything snap to a grid. Now when we move over to this tablet size, we have more real estate, but we don't have a ton, honestly. So we need to figure something out, because when we finally have a lot of space, we can lay them out in 4 horizontally. And so I think this was a very good choice to do it as a little stacked grouping, kind of a little square. Again, they have changed sizes a little bit. It's very it's minimal, but in order to continue to have that circle snap to that grid, those gained in space, and the text boxes as well got a little wider. And then finally, this one, and it won't look like it snaps to a grid, and that's because it doesn't, but it is still based on a grid. If I click on one of these and I move it over, it's actually the width of 2 columns. And there's a reason that it was designed this way. If it were to be as big as 3 columns, it's kind of crazy. It's just too much. It's overkill. And if it were the size of 1, similar to that sign in button or sign up button, it's too small. It's ridiculous. So you kind of have to use your judgment and split the difference and come up with something. So the 2 grid is nice, and then we can use 3 grid for the text. So that gives us still that nice little gutter in between all the text. Everything will always be legible, and the avatars are referencing a grid dimension, but not directly. We've got a see other partners, and you'll see that that does not snap to the grid. It's actually the same size as this. And there's a couple reasons for that being a choice. Again, it might be a little tight. If I only did it for 2 columns, it would be kind of weirdly wide if it was 4 columns. But also, every one of these changes has to be kind of coded in, and a developer will thank you if every once in a while you make some choices that are just a little bit easier for them. This feels like a very nice size. It's actually a little smaller than the mobile, but it feels appropriate for both the tablet and the desktop. I'm going to go a little faster through this, but you'll see that over on the mobile, they were kind of little tiny cards or tabs almost. They're very, very horizontally oriented. It just gave us just enough of information, and the text sits over a darkened image. And then when they moved here, they got pretty creative, and they decided to go with 3 verticals, another vertical, and a really wide horizontal, another really wide horizontal, and a vertical. And that creates a nice flow. It's a little bit unexpected. It's just more interesting to look at than if they had taken the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Well, that might be another reason that they chose to do that. It's 7. That doesn't break down evenly, so we would have ended up with 3 that were vertical and then a final one over here. And so this is a really nice design decision. And they keep that up over here. It just gets wider. It just continues to scale based on the underlying grid below. We've got a little form field here. That stays all the same. This one, everything is snapped to the grid perfectly. This one, for consistency again, starts to break the grid a little bit. It's a little less work for the developer. It still looks really, really nice here. It's okay to break that in this case. Here, it all sits down below in a single column. So those kinds of things need to be thought about as you're gaining in size. And the button is larger because we have more space down here, and we want it to be clickable. You know, again, your phone, your device is kind of small at that point. You want to make sure that things are easily clickable, whereas possibly here, although it's a tablet, so you're, in theory, you're still using your finger, but you have more space, you shouldn't have any trouble tapping that. And then with this, probably you're using a mouse, so you want to keep those kinds of things in mind. And then here we've got this big footer. They've just got the logo, stacked text. They don't seem to have any partners. And then the designer for this website actually went ahead and put their logo on there, and it all snaps to the grid. Exactly the same layout for tablet. It just gets a little bit smaller and attaches itself to that grid. And then very, very different for mobile. It would get really, really small if you were to try and do that same kind of horizontal layout. So they went ahead and did everything in a center aligned text format. If we zoom out, I think you'll kind of see how they're all related. They would all make sense if we were to open a browser this big and start pulling in from, well, I guess you would only see about this much, but start pulling in from the bottom right. It would slowly kind of scale down, then snap to this next breakpoint, then slowly scale down, then snap to this final single column breakpoint. The main thing to keep in mind with responsive design is not necessarily scale everything, not necessarily arrange everything. Kind of look at every bit of the design separately and have fun with it, and know that it's up to you, the designer, to create meaningful, interesting user interface experiences on any device that someone might come visiting that site with.